for a solution. As such, we interact with the International Criminal Court, and today I'd like to speak a bit about the International Criminal Court's preliminary examination of Palestine, what's been accomplished so far, where are we at, what can we expect in the very near future, but also what is the role of civil society and what change in the dynamics have the International Criminal Court caused. So about the ICC preliminary examination on Palestine. So since 16 January of 2015, the prosecutor opened a preliminary examination on the situation in Palestine. She's currently assessing, well, for the last 2 years, is assessing whether or not crimes within the Rome Statute have been committed since June 2014, and those crimes are crimes against humanity, war crimes, and genocide. She's particularly, she's limited to crimes committed by either a Palestinian national or an individual, including Israeli nationals, that commit crime on the Palestinian territory. Thus far, we know that the Office of the Prosecutor is looking into crimes committed by Israeli Defense Forces and Hamas during the 2014 offensive on Gaza. And on the part of the Israeli Defense Forces, the prosecutor has noted alleged attacks against medical facilities, attacks against residential buildings, attacks against Minerva schools, and attacks against other civilian objects and infrastructure. On the part of Palestinian armed groups, she has noted ill treatment of accused collaborators, the use of human shields, and attacks against civilians. The prosecutor has also looked at crimes that are committed in the West Bank, and in particular has taken the destruction of Palestinian structures that resulted. So what's been accomplished so far? The prosecutor, according to her own report, states that her office has reviewed over 300 documents and produced a comprehensive database of over 3,000 reported incidents of crimes allegedly occurring during the 2014 offensive on the Gaza Strip. They're now in the process of processing this database, identifying various incidents, scenes or locations that were particularly hard, and alleged conduct of the different parties. So what's then the role of civil society organizations? Well, during the preliminary examination, which is the earliest stage of any process before the International Criminal Court, the prosecutor relies on either information that's already available, so information that's on internet, for example, reports that have already been produced and are in the public domain, or information that is being transmitted to the prosecutor directly. During a preliminary examination, the prosecutor is not allowed to carry out her own investigations. So society has quite an important role to play to make sure that the prosecutor has the information available to make the best informed decision about the way forward. For Palestinian civil society, again, we've come to the point now where that we have to look at international mechanisms. We realize that the International Criminal Court is a court of last resort, but that is where we believe that the situation in Palestine is at. For us, it's very important that, however, the Office of the Prosecutor is able to capture the true criminality in the occupied Palestinian territory. The Rome Statute is very interesting because it criminalizes acts that necessarily haven't been criminalized by other courts before. And these crimes include, for example, the crime of apartheid, the crime of the transfer of settlers. So far, Palestinian civil society have transmitted 3 batches of evidence. One was general about crimes committed in Gaza by the Israeli Defense Forces. During Operation Cast Lead, as you may know, 1,500 Palestinian civilians were killed. 500 of those were children, and 30,000 Palestinian homes were destroyed. And we have alleged that the crimes of intentional attacks against civilian objects, murder, extensive destruction, and torture were committed. Another batch of evidence related to Rafah. It's in the Gaza Strip. In Rafah, between 1 and 4 August 2016, 212 civilians were killed during 4 days, following what was thought to be the abduction of an Israeli soldier and the invocation of what is a controversial directive called the Hannibal Directive. Also here, we allege that murder had been committed, torture, and attacks against civilian objects. The last batch of evidence that we submitted related to the closure, and it looked more generally at the policy against the Gaza Strip, arguing that the crime of persecution has been committed. Some of what we have alleged is publicly available on our website. So then what is now to be expected in the near future? Unfortunately, the Office of the Prosecutor and actually the International Criminal Court have to consider their resources whenever taking a decision, and they have several cases before them. We're expecting that the case of Palestine is going to take a very long time. The preliminary examination is going to take a couple of years. Certainly, we're not expecting an investigation to be opened this year. This is a very big preliminary examination, not in perhaps its temporal scope, but in a range of crimes that have been alleged. And then lastly, I'd like to talk a bit about the change in environment that the opening of the preliminary examination has created. So when the Office of the Prosecutor opened a preliminary examination, we noticed a rapid escalation of suppression of some societal organizations and attacks against human rights defenders in Palestine. There was a clear connection between the work that we were doing and promoting with international mechanisms. And I think it's very important to note that usually preliminary examinations or any cases before the International Criminal Court come with a certain risk for human rights defenders. But certainly that is something that we need people to know about and to raise awareness about, so as to make sure that the court can continue unhindered and with their work and receive the information that they need to receive. But I'll leave it to that, and I'm sure we'll discuss this a bit more during the Q&A.
So thank you, Nada, again, for all of Al-Hab's work and others to try to bring international accountability and justice for such crimes, in particular given the obstacles and failings of domestic mechanisms. Welcome back. Thanks. To help you while you ponder your questions, just let you know, Amnesty UK, Christian, Jean-Marie and others who very kindly hosted us this evening have also put on some drinks, so there's a little reception afterwards. If anyone would like to wander along from, you're most welcome. And with that perhaps in your mind, does anyone have any questions? Take them in little groups if that's okay. I'll invite them up over here first. And then
I have the mic.
oh, you have, okay.
Thank you very much for those presentations, and thank you very much for the work that you do for Palestinians. Nada talked about the situation of human rights defenders in Palestine. I wanted to ask about the situation in Israel, where obviously you have a lot of laws voted at the Knesset recently that basically aim at restricting the work that human rights defenders do in Israel. So I was just wondering whether we can just get your feedback on that, and whether harder for you to operate within Israel, whether it's harder for you to get financing from abroad, if you can cover that, that would be great.
Great. Come over across this side.
Hello, thank you for the talk. Amnesty International have stated many times that Israel is in violation of international law. How do you expect to pursue accountability when you know well it has and always has the complete protection of all Western governments and their judicial institutions, both international and domestic? And quite frankly, I don't expect to get a satisfactory answer.
Fair enough. And do you want to come back just to go back to you right to chat towards the end?
Thank you. My question is with regards to Rachel's very specific description. What you said at the end of your talk that change can come just from top down but also from bottom up. What you describe seems to, I think, draw a parallel between the home demolitions that happen on one hand, institutions that are aimed at discouraging Palestinians, and what you describe seems to have the same aim, which is to really discourage Palestinians. It seems voluntary, it seems discriminatory, and change coming from the bottom up ultimately is civilian change, is individuals. Do you find change more likely to come from the top down, from the bottom up, from civilian society versus institutions? Where really do you think most impact can be had in order to get things to start changing?
Thank you. A bit more of a political question now, which may be a little bit more answer. Thank you. So the question is, who else can we do?
Yes, there are laws that target human rights organizations in Israel. I don't want to minimize those laws, but they're not yet at the point where they prevent us from doing our work. They hinder our work, they hamper it, they make it more difficult and really annoying, but they don't prevent us from doing our work. What I find much more worrying is the atmosphere of delegitimization that these laws create. And here we're not talking just about legislation, we're also talking about statements made by government officials, by MPs, and those statements have created an atmosphere in which working for human rights is tantamount to treason. I find that completely baffling. I don't understand, I'm not pretending here, I really don't understand why working for human rights is not working for a better state, a better country, a better society. But this is the atmosphere at the moment. That is what I find more worrying than the news.
I'll pick up on that and speak a little bit about what we refer to a lot as closing space for civil society, or closing space for human rights defenders in Israel. In addition to this atmosphere, the human rights organizations are facing a lot of issues concerning financing. There are several right-wing organizations that have started many campaigns abroad, particularly in Europe. These organizations pose many questions to parliaments in order to delegitimize human rights organizations, and then the parliaments go to many different European governments to ask many questions about their funding of human rights organizations. So this is definitely a very serious problem that human rights organizations are facing in Israel. They're also facing a lot of different smear campaigns against organizations. Organizations are being called terror organizations or terror groups when these are human In addition, there are many new laws that are being passed that place various restrictions on freedom of speech, freedom of expression. Many new laws like anti-terror laws, which give very broad and vague definitions of terror and terrorist organizations, which could be used against many people who are engaging in legitimate political activity and will then find themselves classified as terror suspects, with a lot of very harsh criminal procedures that come along with that. In recent years, the Nakba law has been passed in Israel. In recent years, there are two different laws that are imposing a lot of restrictions on the BDS movement. There are anti-boycott laws that make calling for boycott by Israeli citizens or residents of Israel into civil wrongs, that civil cases can be brought against people who call for BDS in Israel. There's a new law to prevent people from entering Israel who advocate for BDS. Foreigners plus people that are part of family unification processes in Israel who may be prevented from entering. So this very wide array of laws has a very big chilling effect on speech, and thus has a very big effect on the space in which human rights organizations operate in Israel.
Nada, can I ask you, do you have a sense, can you say anything about whether you think Western governments may restrict attempts to bring international accountability into play with regards to Israel?
It's a difficult question. I'd like to stay positive. Certainly there have been a wave of discontent from certain countries towards international mechanisms being used. But we've yet to see that dissatisfaction translated into action. So governments actually hindering judicial processes. Well, the judicial process of the ICC in any case, let me make that a bit clear, because we have seen some backlashes when it comes to universal jurisdiction and some measures being adopted by the executive bodies of states to sort of rein in the powers of the court. But certainly we haven't seen that yet in terms of the ICC. I'll try to stay positive there. Say that hopefully the independence of the prosecutor will remain.
So, would anyone like to respond to the question about whether change might come downwards or upwards?
I think I could say something
White shirt.
Light?
Yeah.
White shirt. If possible, slightly.
Can I ask,
Hold on a second.
Nada.
So we'll see if there's any more hands up. They're next to each other, so I might see if there's anything. Yeah, just very good.
Okay, can I ask Nada, please? Shawan Jabarin is your boss in the West Bank, as I understand it, of Al-Haq. He was a member of the PFLP, Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, which is, as you know, responsible for many hijackings and murders of many innocent Israeli Jewish citizens. So my question to you is, how can you call yourself a human rights NGO when your boss has been a member of a proscribed terrorist organisation responsible for the deaths of many innocent civilians in Israel and around the world?
Any more questions? Okay.
Thank you. What I don't understand is why, because we're talking about torture of Palestinians tonight, why Amnesty International, that nobody on the panel, or they didn't think to bring anyone on the panel, that has addressed the huge problem of Hamas torturing many, many Palestinians, murdering them, and this seems to be the most significant problem. I don't understand why you haven't brought that up. And even to the extent when you mentioned, or more than mentioned, you talked, Nadia, about the, was it Nadia or somebody talked about the 4 boys that when they were playing football that lost their lives. Now, there was an investigation into this, and it was actually proved that those 4 boys that tragically lost their lives, in my mind, blood is blood, whoever it is, but those boys were from a Fatah supporting well-known family. What actually happened there was that Hamas was firing rockets from that beach, and for Hamas itself, those 4 innocent boys' lives were not important. The blame on those 4 boys' lives lays with Hamas. And also,
Thanks, I think
yeah,
that's the question.
well, I'd like to know, yeah.
Would you like to respond to that? Is that a too hostile question? Sure. Would you like to respond in a way to either of those?
She didn't answer.
I find this quite shocking that you won't respond.
I'm starting to respond. You're probably aware that we're in Amnesty UK offices and have a very close relationship with the teams who work on all sorts of breaches and suspected breaches of domestic, international, humanitarian and human rights law. I know that they've carried out all sorts of investigations and produced all sorts of documents on abuses, suspected abuses by the PA forces and those of Hamas, including suspected EJDs in Gaza. So we don't need to these people come here to speak on quite specific issues to do with weaknesses in the Israeli justice system. There will be other, and there have been other events to do with Palestinian abuses.
What about Shawan Jabarin, who's the head of Al-Haq, who is a member of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, which is a proscribed terrorist group? Why can't Nada answer how does she feel that her organisation is a human rights organisation when her boss is or was still, or possibly is still, a member of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine? Can she not answer?
That is said that, I mean, she prefers not to speak now. I think we need to respect that. You're asking this with your cameras pointed, recording and so on.
So?
We've already spoken about what the hostile situation is for human rights defenders working on these issues, and I think we have to respect that there are some sensitivities here. Perhaps we can have a quiet conversation outside and
So this is London, this isn't even Israel. So you might complain about Israel, but we're now in London. I'm English, so I'd like to know, this is a human rights organisation and her boss is a member of the PFLP.
If you don't mind,
There is another question, sorry.
To comment on this guy who's talking. My name is Mohammed Jabali, I'm from Gaza. I'm sitting here and experienced the last attacks in the summer of 2014 over Gaza. And what I want to add, as a Palestinian who lived through all this suffering for all our life, and when somebody like him comes to ask this question for her, and why you don't blame your government?
I'm English.
Okay, you're English. Okay. Okay, but you don't see you don't. There's no balance in your question.
It's a
The
question.
government, let's say, okay, you're English. Okay.
It's a question. You don't like
The
questions?
government-
You don't like questions?
No, I love questions. But the government of Israel, why you don't ask people who presenting these, like to ask this question for the people who's killing people and just like being people trapped in between these, your question.
Well, I can't ask them. I'm asking the people who...
And why your question, it doesn't apply for her content because you're asking her actually a political question. And why should she answer you?
Mohammed, could you mind if we, I think you've made your point as well. There are all sorts of different fora where all sorts of different human rights organisations do research and find...
You're not ashamed? I mean, she's not ashamed that her boss is a member of...
Let me answer.
Are you not ashamed?
But surely it makes it a non-human rights organisation that's head by a known terrorist that's been in prison, that's got blood on his hand, and maybe Amnesty International needs to be ashamed that it's actually hosting a group that is terrorist run.
Findings or research by other, then I think that would be a valuable comment.
You're not ashamed at all?
But, you don't have that comment, so I think we need to move on. Can we have...
Oh, Nada, I'm surprised you can't even answer.
Yeah, I have a question. And can you turn your camera off? It's not legal to film people without their permission. That's a human right.
It is in public places, and this is a public place. It is in public places. It is legal because
Don't film it.
I'll turn it off, but it's
Okay, I have